what has been making headlines or made headlines over this week. But before that, I'd like to bring you up to date with the latest news from across the continent of Africa. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and joining us. We will start by going through the headlines of Kenya's leading newspapers. We start with the Daily Nation. Bad day for Graft suspects. In one of the most dramatic corruption cases in the country's history, the courts uphold the conviction of Sirisia Member of Parliament John Waluke and his business associate Grace Wahungu in a 297 million Kenya shillings maize scandal that could see them spend the rest of their lives in jail. MPs fight as Wetang'ula rules Kenya Kwanza has majority. Raila's Azimio side protest at ruling by the National Assembly Speaker that William Ruto's Kenya Kwanza is the majority party in Parliament with 179 MPs against Azimio's 157 for forcing early adjournment of proceedings and vowing to take the battle to the courts in contest in the allegiance of MPs who defected. That story is on page 7. Safaricom sets up shop in Ethiopia and regional expansion. President William Ruto witnesses the launch of the network service in Addis Ababa as Ethiopia also signals it will license M-Pesa services. That is on page 10. Just a month to COP27, host Egypt faces the heat. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's administration accused of human rights violations, even as high hotel costs keep many activists away. The story is on page 28. World Health Organization issues global warming on 4 killer cough syrups. The World Health Organization has warned against the use of 4 cough syrup brands, one of the 4 used for babies and which was linked to the death of 66 children in Gambia. The Gambia was withdrawn from the Kenyan market last year. The drug used as an alternative to Piriton was being imported from India. The drug is being manufactured by Maize Pharmaceuticals and was withdrawn because of its absolute properties. It was available by prescription only and was used for pediatric patients, according to the Kenya Essential Medicines list, was replaced by midazolam. Promethazine, that is the medicine that was replaced. Okay. The Star newspaper, the main headline, battle for Kinoti's job as president overhauls security. Police officers and lawyers say to have applied for the position. The story is on page 4 and 5. How I lost 76 million Kenya shillings to West African Muganga, says Mungatana. All right. Page 2. Waluke headed to jail over Ncpb Maize scandal. The story is on page 9. Safaricom eyes Ethiopia's mobile money market. That is on page 12. All right, the Standard newspaper, chaos in Parliament as Ruto has his way. That is the main headline. Change of fortunes for suspects in court. Also on page 6 and 8, 9,000 apply for 49 top jobs in ministries. That is from page 27 to 31. And Raila, foreign powers messing Africa's democracy. That is on page 10. Safaricom's big bet on Ethiopia. That is on page 32. Babies bear brunt of war in Tigray. That is on page 36. City Madrid prove their worth. That is on the sport pages on page 52. And then we look at some of the headlines of some newspapers across Africa, and we'll take a look at the Citizen from Tanzania. Government to meet UK developer over Zanzibar land revocation. That is the main headline. The Guardian from Tanzania, I suppose, tax alcohol, cigarettes for good of UHC. I guess that is the universal health care. Very well. The Guardian from Nigeria, Tinubu returns, OB in Harvard, PDP seeks urgent solution to crisis. And then the Guardian from the UK, rolling power cuts could put lives at risk, charities tell National Grid. And the Daily Telegraph from the UK warned it could face winter blackouts. Newsday from Zimbabwe, Zambia bails out starving Zimbabwe. And the Daily News from Zimbabwe as well, many would like ED to win. Cross says lack of policies structures will thwart CCC in 2023. The Daily Monitor from Uganda, Museveni bans all roadblocks. Okay. The new vision also from Uganda, government to introduce shifts in schools. And that is what we have in some of the regional newspapers from across Africa and some from outside. All right, so let's just look at some news and then we will get into our conversation. We start with Ethiopia, and both sides in the 2-year-long civil war in northern Ethiopia have now agreed to attend a peace talks this weekend in South Africa following an invitation by the African Union. Tigrayan rebels confirmed they will take part after the Addis Ababa government confirmed its participation earlier on Wednesday. They have, however, raised some questions about the invited participants, observers, guarantors, and the role of the international community. Fighting in Tigray state resumed in August, breaking a 5-month humanitarian truce. The upsurge has also brought in troops from neighboring Eritrea who are backing the Ethiopian government army. The talks will include mediators from former presidents of Nigeria and Kenya, Olusegun Obasanjo, and former President Uhuru Kenyatta. We go to Ethiopia, where gunmen have freed 23 captives they abducted on a moving train in northern Nigeria's Kaduna state in March. The passengers are the last batch of the more than 50 people kidnapped in the infamous incident on their way from Abuja. A statement from an aide to Nigeria's military chief said they were released around 4 o'clock local time, and the Nigerian government blamed Boko Haram for the abduction. In its latest review of economic conditions, the World Bank projects sub-Saharan Africa economies will experience a decline in growth from 4.1% in 2021 to 3.3% in 2022 due to rising inflation, adverse weather conditions, and a tightening in global financial conditions. Slow economic growth, food insecurity, and high debt levels are some of the main challenges developing nations, including those in Africa, must contend with. Inevitably, these issues have resulted in high cost of living for a lot of people. The strengthening of the US dollar is also making debt servicing costlier and rising imports bills for countries, piling more pressure on domestic inflation. In November 2020, World Bank report notes that Africa's food import bill has over the last few decades more than tripled to hit $35 billion a year. And the World Bank, the report also added that African nations ought to increase domestic production and cut on imports. And a food shortage in Liberia, which has resulted in a lack of the staple food rice, has inflamed tensions with civil society groups, students, and even politicians threatening street protests to force the government to address the situation. On Tuesday, tensions escalated with large crowds of desperate and angry people gathering in front of empty rice warehouses. The Ministry of Commerce issued a hastily prepared press release to reassure the public. It said there were rice in the country and urged rice retailers not to restrict sales or engage in profiteering at the expense of the ordinary people, a clear sign of the level of concern in the hundreds of people, largely women, who were sleeping in the open around the rice warehouses of foreign importers. Opposition political parties have blamed the government for the crisis, but ruling party supporters say this is unfounded. We go to Rwanda, and journalists and rights groups have voiced their joy over the acquittal of 3 journalists who had been in jail for 4 years without trial over allegedly inciting insurrection, publishing unoriginal statements or pictures, and spreading rumors charges. Human Rights Watch have criticized the court for failure to stop this sham of a trial much earlier. The judge said the prosecution did not present enough evidence against the journalists Mutuyimana Jean Damascene, Nashimiyimana Jean Baptiste, and Nyosenga Shadrach, who had been in jail since 2008 and ordered their release. The prosecution has 30 days to appeal against the court's decision. And Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba faces an uphill battle to gain Africa's support in the war against Russia as leaders in the continent shrug off pressure to distance themselves from Vladimir Putin. Mr. Kuleba's inaugural visit to the region has so far received less public and media attention than that of his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in July. Mr. Kuleba said the 10-day Africa tour was aimed at establishing a mutually beneficial Ukrainian-Africa renaissance amid contesting narratives in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in late February. He began his tour in Senegal on Tuesday, where he met President Macky Sall, who is the current chairperson of the African Union, and Foreign Minister Aissata Tall Sall. The two countries signed bilateral cooperation deals in trade, agriculture and other sectors. Mr. Kuleba arrived in Ivory Coast on Wednesday for meetings with officials and business diplomats. Russian diplomats in Africa have sustained a prominent media and public presence as Moscow faces a global backlash over the war that has precipitated a global food crisis. The Moroccan government has issued 10 permits for farmers to legally grow cannabis for industry and export for the first time. Farmers in the northern regions of Al Hoceima, Chafchon and Tunate will be allowed to produce and sell cannabis for medical, pharmaceutical and industrial use in accordance with the law passed by Parliament last year. The National Agency Regulating Cannabis Activities, which issued the permit, said farmers will be encouraged to increase illegal cannabis production to meet the need of the market. Morocco has long been one of the world's largest producers of illegal cannabis. It is grown in the poorest mountainous regions of the North African country and trafficked to Europe. The government's move to legalize cannabis production is meant to improve the conditions of the poor farmers and generate revenue for the economy. And that's all Wajakoya was trying to tell all of us. Very well, we go to Lesotho, a small kingdom perched in the mountains of southern Africa, where political instability has ousted the heads of government of the past decade before their terms were up, is holding parliamentary elections today. The constitutional monarchy of 2.2 million people, which is landlocked within South Africa, has a long history of political turmoil. Coup d'etats and forced exile have followed one another in the former British protectorate, which has been independent since 1966. In 30 years of rule, Moshosho II was twice forced into exile. The current king, his son Letsi III, succeeded him in 1996, and in 2014 a failed coup led to the fight of the former prime minister, who was reinstated through foreign mediation. In this mixed parliamentary system, with a king who has no real power, the prime minister rules. But for the last decade, the country the size of Belgium has been ruled by coalition governments, with no party able to win an absolute majority at the ballot box. The assembly has 120 seats, with 80 elected by majority vote and 40 appointed by a proportional representation. Lesotho tried before the elections to stabilize its system and prevent members from switching sides once elected, but the reform attempt, supported by European Union, the United Nations and neighboring countries in the Southern Africa Development Community (SADC), failed. We go to South Sudan. The General Prosecutor on Wednesday indicated religious leader Abraham Chol indicted religious leader Abraham Chol on accusations of forming a group and instigating conspiracy to topple the unity government. Abraham Chol, who is 55 years old, appeared in court for the second time alongside 4 others, including a media personnel Daniel Malith, security guard Samuel Mayan, and 2 immigration officers, James Lal and David Chern. The General Prosecutor Major Deng Alor, in his indictment speech, accused Prophet Abraham Chol and 4 others of inciting the public and organizing forces to rise against the government. He was indicted under Section 66, 77, 7, 201, 202 of the Penal Code Act 2008. The sections are subverting constitutional government, causing disaffection among police force and defense forces, publishing or communicating false statements prejudicial to Southern Sudan, and undermining authority of or insulting the president. Okay. And still staying with South Sudan, the Minister of Information Michael Makuei on Wednesday dismissed the Sentry's report implicating the First Family and instead termed it as corrupt entity. In its latest report on corruption, Sentry has linked members of the First Family as beneficiaries of a looting scheme involving briefcase investment companies operating in South Sudan. The 3-year investigation into the letters of credit program found that multi-million-dollar contracts were awarded to foreign-run companies, some of which are believed to be only existing on paper. The report found that the children, nieces and nephews of the president have shares in at least 5 companies that received millions from credit-backed contracts. The investigation also indicated that a report on the letters of credit program by the Auditor General of South Sudan was presented to President Salva Kiir and the South Sudanese Parliament in 2015, but has never been made public. And still staying with South Sudan, the World Bank says South Sudan cannot receive infrastructure funding from international investors due to lack of financial policies and transport sector regulations. The bank has placed conditions to be met before the country begins receiving funding for roads and infrastructure development. A new study by East African body, the Northern Corridor Transit and Transport Coordination Authority, NCTTCA, has found that South Sudan's roads are the worst. In the region, the roads became worse following recent torrential rains that made them impassable because of flash flooding and mud. A delegation from the World Bank is in the capital, Juba, to discuss the possibilities of supporting the country's road network connectivity. They said for the bank to support South Sudan's transport sector, the government needs to put in place clear institutional regulations and financial policies. Researchers in Uganda says the Ebola virus circulating in the country has mutated. Professor Pontiano Kalibu of the Ugandan Virus Research Institute says there is, however, no evidence that it is any transmissible than the original strain. They analyzed samples from first known case to be tested during the current outbreak, which has now spread to 5 districts in central Uganda. So far, 44 cases have been reported and 10 people have died from the disease. Researchers tracking its spread say the genetic makeup of the virus looks similar to one responsible for another outbreak over a decade ago in the same region. One person died at the same time. Studies done in neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo show the repeat outbreaks can occur, but not more than 2 years after the first one has been declared over. And we go back to Nigeria. At least 18 women and children have drowned in Nigeria's northwestern Zamfara state after their boat capsized as a gang of kidnappers opened fire on them, a resident has said. The 18 were among dozens of people trying to escape an attack by the gunmen on the village of Binin Waje in the Bukuyum area. The attackers shot dead at least 6 people and kidnapped 7 other villagers before opening fire on those fleeing on 2 boats. The residents told the BBC the shooting caused something of a stampede on the boats, which then tipped over, the residents explained. The residents who are also speaking to the BBC said, not giving the names for safety reasons, say that 18 bodies had been recovered, but several others were still missing. The attackers have also abducted at least 16 people in the nearby village of Dargaje. Zamfara is one of Nigeria's states worst affected by killings and kidnappings for ransom. And about 70 tons of food have been flown to the northern Burkina Faso city of Djibo, which has been blockaded by militant Islamists, according to military sources cited in local media. The city, which has a population of 300,000, has faced a shortage of food and medicines, with reports that 9 malnourished children have died because of the blockade. People in other parts of Burkina Faso have been raising cash and food to send to Djibo. The military sources say the food had already been distributed to residents, but the humanitarian crisis remains critical, with Sidiki Tambora, a native of Djibo, who heads an non-governmental organization, saying access roads to the city have been cut off since February. Captain Ibrahim Traore seized power last week, overthrowing another military officer, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Damiba, after accusing him of failing to quell the insurgency that has devastated the lives of many people in Burkina Faso since 2015. And we end our news from Mozambique, and the country has detected its first case of monkeypox since the World Health Organization reported an outbreak of the disease in non-endemic countries in May. A man in the capital, Maputo, has been diagnosed with the illness, health officials said, adding that he had a history of travel. Efforts are underway to trace all the people with whom he had contact, officials have added. Monkeypox has also been reported in neighboring South Africa and Malawi, and monkeypox is caused by the monkeypox virus, a member of the same family of the viruses as smallpox, although it is much less severe, and experts say chances of infections are low. Quite a lengthy news bulletin there, but I believe now you're up to date with the latest from across the continent of Africa. A very good morning to you. We're joined by Samuel Tawish. Samuel Tawish, A very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Miriam Ogutu from our communication head office. Good morning to our viewers watching the program in Kenya, Africa, and the rest of the world. It is my pleasure to join you on this program this Friday, Miriam.
All right, it is nice to have you. And of course, the show is the week that was. That is the name of the program. And so we will get into what we felt stood out for us as far as the events across Africa is concerned. But let's look at this story in Burkina Faso. We know what happened a couple of days ago. And, the toppling of the other what is that story? I just looked at it right now. Anyway, so the toppling of the general who had removed President Christian Kabore over issues that has to do with insecurity, but since they came into power, that continued, and so this new government also toppled. Yeah, it's right here. Also toppled. And over the same matter. But what I don't understand, and maybe the extremist activities in the Sahel region are quite different from the terrorist activities or the extremist activities we've been experiencing, even for us here in Kenya, perhaps. I don't understand how a whole section of a country can be experiencing a blockade. Because from the news that I'm reading right now is that now food, aid is able to flow to the northern Burkina Faso city of Djibo, which has been blockaded by militant groups. Can you imagine, assuming the way we had a rampant, Al-Shabaab attacks and activity, especially in the northern part of Kenya, to an extent where the government cannot even access the people and, in that region. What is the extent? What could bring a country to that state? What does that say about their security infrastructure and the government, in just overall?
Thank you, Miriam. Foremost, I think we need to appreciate the events that has characterized leadership in Burkina Faso all this long, Miriam. And we all know that there's been a lot of issues as regards to the leadership, that the issue of the coup that you've just alluded to, that we've witnessed just a couple of days ago. And Miriam, when you look into these events as they continue to unfold, it looks like there's also a political hand in it, because as you understand, the president who has just been, the military leader who was actually who was ousted from office, is also having his own supporters, and who knows, perhaps maybe it is the people or the leadership that supports him that has conspired maybe to create maybe insecurity or to make that country ungovernable. Because again, Miriam, when there's a blockade of such nature, then it makes it difficult even for goods and services to move from one place to another. And essentially what that means is that people are going to be cut off in terms of getting these essential goods and services. They're not going to get, say for example, medical supplies. They're not going to get food. Government services or otherwise may not really reach to this group of people or to this region that has been really that a blockade has been erected. So, Miriam, what that really means is that we have individuals maybe who are leaning on the side of the ousted leader, and maybe they have decided to cause a disruption and chaos to make the country ungovernable, so that maybe they can come to a negotiating table. But the issue to do with military coups in Africa today, and mostly when you go to Central and West Africa countries, you get to understand that they've become more like a normal daily routine. It's no longer news anymore that we are having coups every now and then, that governments are toppled, that top military officials really ousting leaders from power, and them themselves, they want to really get into this power, but again, they also forget that there are people who are working with them, and everybody is envious. Everybody would want to get that power. So when you see these leaders really go, or the military leaders go and oust one leader from office, you see what has happened. For example, in Burkina Faso today, he has also been removed from office. That it may not really end there. There could be someone else who is really buying the very position and trying also to really strategize how to remove the current leader now who has really taken over, or who really instigated the coup. You saw, for example, what happened in was it in South Africa? The way, I mean, the transitions, the way they have happened from one president to another, to appoint even a deputy president himself, really instigating a coup to remove his boss from office. So essentially, Miriam, I think the issues of coups in the African continent today have become so rampant. And I think something really needs to be done, because we need to respect the institution. We need to respect, our governments and the leaders that the people have put into place. Because for how long can a nation or a continent really continue in this, cycle of removing one leader after another? When will the country really settle down? Because as things are now in Burkina Faso, you cannot tell me that the people in that particular country can settle down and concentrate on very serious activities about even developing their country, because the political turmoil will not allow them really to settle, or it will not give that environment for them to be able to carry on with their daily activities. So, Miriam, this is something that must be reprimanded, especially from the African Union and the rest of the African organs, and also from the international community, because Burkina Faso as a nation is not an island. They are part and parcel of the global nation that we are in as a continent. So they have to be reprimanded, and they have to get back on track so that that nation can continue, can really can become prosperous, and have people can concentrate on building that nation. We do not want to see such kind of incidences really being allowed to continue the way we have witnessed in the recent past. Miriam, I submit.
All right, Beryl, thank you so much. But also, before we move on to another story, the matters of external interference or external forces or even external contest, like we've been seeing, because initially, France is still there. I think it is in Mali where they fell out completely, but France had put up, had helped put up the G5, the Sahel G5, that is Burkina Faso, we have Mali, we have Niger, we have Chad, and this other country I'm forgetting, so that they come together and they work together as far as fighting extremism is concerned. So Mali got out of that group, so that left a huge a huge gap there as far as the fighting, the insurgency is concerned. But from what we saw, what we've been seeing happening, the junta, I think the Prime Minister, once he came back from the United Nations General Assembly, and he was received, and the people were carrying placards saying, to hell with France, Russia is our new savior, Russia is our new partner who is helping us in this country. So we've seen that that contest now, wanting, everybody wants to, these two especially, wanting to really get a hand and influence over Burkina Faso's matters. And then just before the Russian mercenaries came in, I don't know if they're present in Burkina Faso, but I'm sure the Russians are helping out there as far as fighting jihadism is concerned. But France was there, and these other European countries, and they've been there for a long time. And the way you've said, this is not a small matter, really. It requires a concerted efforts between countries and partners. But you'd wonder, what were they doing, these other forces from outside? Were they just really pacifying, but not really trying to find a solution for this, so that they continue their stay longer than perhaps they were supposed to be there, and maybe it just fell out? But why do you think they were unable to solve this problem up to now, with the amount of help that they've been offering, especially in the Sahel region, and of course the issue of external interference, which I think is playing a huge role in what you're seeing here today?
Miriam, it's undeniable that we could be having an external hand or external force in as far as the situation we are in, or that Burkina Faso and the rest of the countries you've mentioned really find themselves in. But again, who is it that we are going to blame, Miriam? These problems stem from our family units. They stem from the counties where we come from. They stem from the tribal regions where we come from. They stem from the countries where you come from. That's why you see it's not even very easy really for you to unite a nation today in the African continent, because even from a family level, from a family unit, you'll find people are disintegrated. Today, if you talk about a single currency, for example, in the continent of Africa, you're talking about maybe a single visa or such kind of things, something to do with the commonality for the African people, you will find that not all the African nations will really go the same direction. You will find others really pulling a different direction. Essentially, what I'm trying to say that, Miriam, is that we have a lot of disunity amongst our nations here in the African continent, and more so also amongst our very own leaders. You will not understand why, for example, Ugandan President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni will not really be able to sit down with Rwandan President Paul Kagame and have a discussion, one about how they can be able to have bilateral trades, how they can be able to grow these nations together, how these neighboring countries can be able to do trade without any barriers. You cannot understand really, Miriam, what is the biggest problem, because today neighboring countries are fighting from every other time. Look at what is happening in Ethiopia today, between Ethiopia, the TPLF, and the hand, of course, the external hand coming from the Eritrea, the neighboring country. There's a feeling that they're interfering with the internal affairs in Ethiopia. So basically what I'm trying to tell you, Miriam, is that there's a lot of this unity that is being displayed by our African leaders and African nation, and that in itself has also really exposed our population onto a lot of vulnerability when it comes to the conflicts and also the issue of extremism that you're talking about. So generally, in as much as we will want to really shift blame and say it's about the Western power countries, it's about the European nations, is about people who are interested in our mineral resources. The question is, if we are united in our own unit, in our own, say, for example, as African continent, or Burkina Faso as a nation, if the leaders and the people are united, do you think, Miriam, it will be easier even for an enemy to be able to invade or even interfere with the affairs of that particular nation, leave alone even the European nation, leave alone even the French? I mean, even the neighboring nation will not be able to interfere easily. They may attempt, but it will be scattered because the people and the country is united, and the people united cannot be defeated. So I think the problem stems, the whole thing is about lack of unity. And once we address such kind of an issue, Miriam, then I don't think we'll continually be blaming the Western power countries, because for how long will we want to sit pretty and continue really pointing fingers at the Western power countries? Does it mean we are unable to do anything about it? Does it mean we cannot be able to sit down and ask ourselves, how come we are allowing external forces to come and divide our people? Because these fights, Miriam, I can tell you the reason why it has become very easy even for people to fight, and even coups to be undertaken. It all boils down to the issue of lack of unity, and now the external hand or external forces will find it very easy really to manipulate or even to take advantage of such kind of disunity, really, to impose any kind of regimes that they will really want. Because again, if you have regimes or leaders who do not subscribe to the ideology of these Western power countries, those who have interest, for example, in the mineral resources, and particularly on this case of oil, Miriam, I can clearly tell you will not stay in power for long, Miriam. And those are the challenges that we are facing. So I think it is time we need to address the issue of unity for our people, unity for our leaders as a continent. By doing so, we'll slowly but gradually eliminating any chances or avenues that the external forces or these Western imperialists would want to exploit really at the disadvantage of our people and continent.
Yes, indeed. And I think what you're saying is very reminiscent to what Thomas Sankara was pushing for. Remember, that is actually what costed his life. He really wanted a united Burkina Faso where people were united and were united in building their country and just finding their own solutions. And that did not please the external forces, and we saw what happened to him. He was murdered, and his best friend, Blaise Compaoré, was installed there. And I think that unity and that togetherness that he was seeking for must be haunting Burkina Faso today, and it's elusive. It's elusive, and I think the same external factors have made sure that does not happen, because there's power in unity, and that has been something that has been lacking in the context of African politics or African issues, and that's why we are where we are. Okay. Another country that seems to be having some problems in that regard, not so much like that, but still. South Sudan and the World Bank now says South Sudan cannot receive infrastructure funding from international investors due to lack of financial policies and transport sector regulations. And the bank has placed conditions to be met before the country begins receiving funding for roads and infrastructure. And I was just going through some images of some of the roads in South Sudan. It has the worst roads in Africa, I think next to the Democratic Republic of Congo and that. But for South Sudan, we understand it is a country that just before it settled down and started rebuilding itself, war broke, and the instability that has been experienced in that country has not allowed it to really settle into matters development. So on one hand, it is understandable, but on the other hand, the Minister of Information, Michael Makuei, on Wednesday dismissed the Century's report implicating the First Family and instead termed it a corrupt entity. Remember, Century by George Clooney and Pendergast, they own that. And in its latest report on corruption, the Century has linked members of the First Family as beneficiaries of a looting scheme involving briefcase investment companies operating in South Sudan. It's just the level of corruption. And I think they've been really putting a spotlight on what has been happening in South Sudan. Century and other groups, and even the United Nations investigative agencies themselves, the reports that you've received in South Sudan is very corrupt, and a lot of people who get to benefit from this corruption and the things that happen there are the people who are the leaders in that country. And that's why there has been an argument. Finding peace and stability in South Sudan might be elusive because the current status quo, they get to benefit by the way things are. So the World Bank is saying that we are unable to fund roads because of there are no structures, lack of financial policies and transport sector regulations that will help us. I think they act as accountability for whatever it is that needs to be done there, but that is lacking. I don't know, what do you make of this?
Miriam, it's normal for government to come and defend itself, especially in the face of such a kind of grave accusations that there have been that has been leveled against, especially the First Family in South Sudan. And I don't think that this is anything vindictive. I don't think this is anything of witch hunt. I think it is just generally a genuine concern and a call for transparency and accountability, especially on the use of public resources, which of course our leaders are by obligation really supposed to ensure that they utilize the public resources for the good of the people, and not really for the gratification of themselves or even for their immediate family or for their cronies. So I think what the President Salva Kiir of South Sudan and of course the entire leadership or his government should do is really to be able to come out and defend with the evidence, the accusations that have been leveled against them, because it's not enough for just a government minister really to come out and refute claims without really telling us the nitty-gritties about these allegations and maybe how they have been able to spend these finances. If you are able to give a breakdown of how maybe these finances have been utilized, then it will be very easy for them really to even counter the accusations that have been leveled against the First Family. So as it is, Miriam, it's evident that the leaders mostly in African continent today, they don't get into power really to give services to the people, but it's about self-gratification. It's about enriching themselves, their family members, and their kins and their cronies. This is very, very unfortunate. We want leaders who put the interests of the people first, people who prioritize that which matters to the people, who put them into this office. And no wonder, Miriam, we have been seeing an ending conflict and infight in South Sudan situation, because again, these people are more inclined on how they are going to amass more wealth illegally, so, and enrich themselves and their families at the expense of the lives and the livelihood of the people of South Sudan. This is very, very unfortunate. And I think at this particular moment, the measures and the policies that South Sudan has been called upon really to strengthen and make sure that they are watertight before they can be given further funding, I think is a welcome move, because World Bank or any other organization or even donation cannot just come and give money freely without asking for accountability and transparency on how those resources are going to be utilized. Miriam, I think this is something that is a welcome. I'm sure President Salva Kiir and those around him are not very comfortable with such kind of statements or conditions being given to South Sudan government. But I think this is a welcome move, especially for the benefit of the people, so that by the end of the day, there has to be value for money, there has to be transparency, there has to be accountability. This is something that must not just be said, but it must be seen to be done, Miriam. And I think that is what these organizations are moving to us, to make sure that South Sudan leadership can be able to enhance transparency, accountability, and strengthen the policies so that even any monies that there's an intent to have any monies really being given to South Sudan, it can be for the benefit of the people and not a few individuals in the name of leaders.
Mm-hmm. And let me just read a bit of that report from Sentry before we move on. The advocacy group, the Sentry, on Wednesday released a new report on South Sudan, detailing how nearly $1 billion was stolen in a massive scam involving banks in Qatar and guess what? In Kenya. It says $993 million was stolen in a massive bank credit scam that left devastating, deadly impact on children and communities across South Sudan. In its report titled "Cash Grab: How a $1 billion Credit Scam Robbed South Sudan of Fuel, Food and Medicine," the Sentry revealed that Qatar National Bank and CFC Stanbic provided letters of credit in exchange for projected oil revenues in South Sudan. The report says massive lines were turned into an opportunity to steal by corrupt leaders and their cronies, with the government of South Sudan left on the hook to pay back the loaned money. Can you hear that? So South Sudan, that we know is broke, matter of fact, it can't even afford its annual fee for the East African community nor for the African Union. And now, South Sudan will have to pay this money that it received as a loan. $1 billion will have to pay the money that never got to do what it was supposed to do. Now, the US-based advocacy group says that nearly $1 billion officially meant to deliver fuel, food, and medicine from across South Sudan disappeared into a maze of international shell companies that never provided any goods or services. This left people to die as hospitals went without medicine and neonatal ward generators went cold, said the Sentry. And these massive kleptocratic schemes continue unchecked since these letters of credit scheme were launched. Corruption in South Sudan has only escalated, said Sentry co-founder John Prendergast. And shockingly, billions of dollars worth of contracts continue to be awarded to insiders connected to President Kiir, some of whom have already been sanctioned and involved in bribes and kickbacks. Several individuals identified in the investigation who were paid but did not provide urgent services and supplies are still being awarded government contracts today, the report says, and I think it mentioned even Salva Kiir's children and relatives and other also government officials in the same manner. Now it makes sense why they pushed the elections to happen. I'm not, these are allegations and these are investigations, so we can't prove whether they're true or not, but you know, Sentry Group is a respected, and it's not the first time it has released a report, and sometimes the United Nations bases and ties its investigations towards, this organization. And elections are supposed to happen this year, but they were pushed, and not even to next year, but in 2024. And I think when we were having this conversation here, Samuel Tawish, we noted the lack of will by the leaders in South Sudan to actually hurry up and have an election. Of course, there are other factors that have to be considered, before the election can actually happen. But there seems to be a lack of will for transition in South Sudan, for the elections that maybe might usher in a new leadership. And so the way things are right now has only created an environment where corruption can really thrive. South Sudan is the second most corrupt country in the world. Somalia is the first one, and that is because of how those countries are today. So I don't know, Sawish, if you can add something, and then we can just move on to something else.
Miriam, I think for President Salva Kiir, he will rather favor or prefer the status quo to remain so that he can continue being in power. And that is why he will frustrate every effort, every initiative to make sure that we have a democratic election. Just like you've said, that may usher in a new dawn, a new regime, one which is going to put the interests of the people first. So I think for President Salva Kiir, in fact, even reasons given as to why elections cannot be held are not that convincing. Because Miriam, you cannot treat such a very serious exercise with the kind of casualness that President Salva Kiir is trying to treat it with. Because again, matters to do with elections do not just happen as an accident. They don't just come as an emergency. There are things that we know, for example, after every 5 years, we are supposed to conduct an election. So if you just wake up one day and say, because of the prevailing circumstances or conditions, we cannot be able to have elections, sometimes or more often, these leaders who want to remain in power, of course, give excuses of lack of money as to the reason why they cannot be able to really conduct an election. And I think President Salva Kiir and the entire leadership that has never really seen it fit even to sit down and really strategize on how South Sudan can really can sprout from where it is today, Miriam. Well, I remember very well and vividly so how, the people of South Sudan were agitating really to have a referendum to separate from Sudan. And that referendum was successful. Some of us even thought maybe out of this referendum and out of a creation of this new young nation in the continent of Africa, that the leadership that was actually fronting this idea for having this new nation in the name of South Sudan will really give priority to now concentrate so much on uplifting the livelihood of the people of South Sudan, on making sure that, say, for example, the oil, because South Sudan has a lot of oil, that they are going to exploit this oil for the benefit of the people and grow the economy of South Sudan. But that has not been the case so far. The elites in South Sudan are so much concentrating in amassing wealth for themselves and for their families and building mansions and sometimes even, hoarding these monies in foreign nations. Most of them even are living here in Nairobi, comfortably, when the ordinary Wananchi are really struggling even to put a meal in South Sudan. This is very, very unfortunate. And I do not understand how we can be able to allow a nation, in a family called the African continent, really to do things in total disregard of the set out treaties and the policies that are supposed to guide some of the very critical and important exercises, like having an election, and that a president or a leadership in a country can wake up one day and say, we cannot be able to conduct an election. In fact, we should even move and have a recommendation that if you are not able to conduct an election, then let's have somebody maybe to be in power in an acting capacity and not the current leadership, because the leaders who do not want to leave power will frustrate and make it difficult for this exercise to take place. But I want to hope that the African Union, which in itself looks like a toothless dog, they cannot be able to bite, Miriam. I just want to have hope against hope that they can be able to rise to the occasion and perhaps maybe have some sanctions on South Sudan so that the people of South Sudan can be able to determine their leadership, a new regime through, of course, a democratic exercise, that is election.
Okay, thank you. And of course, that Sentry report has already elicited some reaction. And of course, it called upon the U.S. government. Remember, the U.S. is the leading country as far as aid and donor funding is concerned in South Sudan. So what it says is very, very important and could have an impact, or any action it chooses to take, as far as even cutting the donor funding or anything else in South Sudan. So it is a very key player, the US, and of course the Troika, US, Norway, and Britain. Now, this Sentry has called on the US government to investigate illicit money flows revealed in its latest corruption report on South Sudan. It says the U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and the Department of Justice should investigate the ways in which the process of the corruption apparent in the letters of credits programs were laundered out of South Sudan. And the Sentry said consideration should be given to applying network sanctions to any groups of companies connected to the family members of the political elites in South Sudan that are found to be used for bad means. The government spokesperson, of course, has dismissed that report. There's some news site. Let me just, the U.S. once again has traveled to South Sudan. Okay, let's see what this is about now. The U.S. government has issued an advisory to its citizens not to travel to South Sudan due to crimes, kidnapping, and armed conflict in the country. The Department of State stated on its official website yesterday that the security situation in South Sudan has reached an alarming level. The department's Bureau of Consular Affairs alleges that carjackings, shootings, ambushes, assaults, robberies, and kidnappings are common throughout South Sudan, including Juba. It said foreign nationals have been the victims of rape, sexual assault, armed robberies, and other violent crimes, according to the U.S. Department of State. An armed conflict is ongoing and includes fighting between various political ethnic groups. But that is not news. I think there's been a continued, conflict in South Sudan. But according to the U.S., things have since escalated, which I think is really, if that is true, and I'm not saying it's not, U.S. sometimes issues some travel alerts that sometimes are really not necessary, like the ones they issued, like in Kisumu, remember, during our electioneering period. So, maybe they have some good intelligence as far as this is concerned. Just a couple of weeks ago, there were the passing out of the unified forces. I think over 83,000 of them are meant to have passed out right now, and perhaps they've been spread out across the country to ensure the issue of security is taken care of. So if that is the case, so why do we have an increase in this insecurity-related, problems?
I think the whole issue is to do with the strategy, Miriam, because you may have a very big number of security or personnel or officials, but again, when you lack a proper strategy on how you're able to deal with these insecurity matters, then by the end of the day, it becomes a zero-sum game. You're not going to achieve anything meaningful. So I think when you see this continued rampant insecurity, as is the situation, then the best thing to do, common sense will dictate that you have to go back to the drawing board and look into the strategies and what Dr. Masanga usually says, fatigue evaluation, an audit of how the operation has been, how the whole initiative has been, what kind of achievements have we made so far, what are the setbacks, and how are we able really to streamline ourselves to be able even to deal with the setbacks that we are encountering, in as far as, of course, pacifying that region is concerned. So I think it is not enough really to have a big number of boots on the ground. The most important thing is to go back on the strategy, and I think probably, just my opinion, that is where maybe we are failing, because if you have really facilitated, you have enough personnel which has been well facilitated, which has been well resourced, what makes it difficult really to be able to bring this issue to an end? I think generally it's the issue to do with the strategy. They have to go back to the drawing board, and more so also involve the intelligence apparatus, because, Miriam, there are some really matters of insecurity that are so complex that you cannot just, deal with them casually. You will need, to employ different approaches and different strategies, and sometimes even high intel for you to be able really to deal with such kind of insecurity. So I think it's more to do with strategy, and that is where they should concentrate, even as they continue to have these young men and the women on the ground, Miriam.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Let's move on to another matter, which I found to be very interesting. The Moroccan government has issued 10 permits for farmers to legally grow cannabis for industry and export for the first time. Farmers in the northern regions will be allowed to produce and sell cannabis for medical, pharmaceutical, and industrial use in accordance with a law passed by Parliament last year. The National Agency Regulating Cannabis Activities, which issued the permits, said farmers will be encouraged to increase legal cannabis production to meet the need of the market. Morocco has long been one of the world's largest producers of illegal cannabis. It is grown in the poorest mountainous regions of North African country and trafficked to Europe. The government's move to legalize cannabis production is meant to improve the conditions of the poor farmers and generate revenue for the economy. Exactly what Wajakoya, presidential candidate, was trying to sell to us, but we did not get it. But countries like Morocco seems to understand what he was trying to say. This could be an honor, a foreign exchange honor to the country, Matawish, apparently. But Morocco is doing
Yes, indeed, Miriam. Yes, indeed, Miriam. And I think if there are laws and proper regulations that are going really to guide how this farming is going to be done, and so that it's not going to be misused, and more so to ensure that there's going to be more foreign exchange and also improve the economy of Morocco, so be it. Because I think, Miriam, those are some of the, the gaps or the lapses that usually most countries or nations experience today. If you just allow the farming of this cannabis without any regulations, without any laws, then becomes a menace altogether. Miriam, when you look into, for example, the situation of the water hyacinth in Lake Victoria, it's a very big menace in that part of the country, and especially for the fishermen and also people who rely, for example, on that water, for example, even for transport and fishing and some other economic activities. But again, research has it that this water hyacinth can be utilized even to make fertilizer. So that's why I'm telling you, Miriam, if we had such kind of people with such kind of, technical ability or capacity to be able to carry out research on how this can be beneficial, something we feel like it is really a major headache. Say, for example, Lake Victoria can be turned into something meaningful and useful in the name of fertilizer. Miriam, I think is a very good idea. So sometimes we need to think outside the box. We need really to have technical expertise, rather people who can be able to really to tell what other benefits can we really be able to exploit in terms of these things that we view, with a negative perspective. Because when you come to Kenya, and I saw how there was so much ridicule on presidential candidate Wajakoya when he came out with this issue of the cannabis. And I think it's one of those issues really in his manifesto or agendas that really popularized him and identified him with so many hustlers, quote unquote, or the young majority. Really, because they were so much excited and felt like it's been very difficult even to access or get this product, or even sometimes even maybe use or smoke. So it really gave a lot of fame to one Wajakoya within no time, and he was the talk of town. So I greatly agree that if we can have policies and regulations, there's absolutely no problem and no reason why Morocco and even other countries in the African continent really can follow suit and see how this plant can be utilized for the betterment of the livelihood of the people and also improving the economy. And because when governments get this foreign earnings or foreign exchange, then they'll be able to utilize this money to improve, say, for example, infrastructure and other areas of development. That is a good idea, Miriam. I think it's a welcome move.
All right. Thank you for that. Now, chaos in Parliament. As Ruto has his way, Wetang'ula's decision that UDA is the majority party has paved the way for the president's party to nominate members to key committees, among them the one that will vet cabinet secretaries. Protest from Azimio fell on deaf ears. So we will not even get into the details of that. And Raila's Azimio side protest at ruling by the National Assembly Speaker that William Ruto's Kenya Kwanza is the majority party in parliament with 179 MPs against Azimio's 157, forcing early adjournments of proceedings and vowing to take the battle to the courts in contest in the allegiance of MPs who defected. The move to go to court, do you think, when you look at the prevailing factors right now, is it necessary? And what do you make of that showdown we saw in Parliament yesterday?
Miriam, one, it is unfortunate that our leaders can engage in such kind of, ugly scenes like it was witnessed yesterday in Parliament. I mean, we are becoming synonymous with such kind of incidences, and I think it's not a good show and example to our young generation and people who look up to our leaders really as role models or as the guiding compass in as far as life is concerned. And more so, these people did not behave in a dignified manner. They did not behave as honorable members. I think they behaved as dishonorable members for that matter. Be that as it may, Miriam, you remember when we were having the previous discussion on some of our programmings, I did tell you that I do not expect any surprise at all. And I really was just but looking forward for Wetang'ula to rule in favor of Kenya Kwanza. I told you in as much as this is the Speaker of the National Assembly of Kenya, but don't forget that he is sitting on that seat by virtue of the blessings from the Kenya Kwanza leadership. And he cannot come really and disappoint them at a time when they needed his intervention most. And I think yesterday was one of those moments that Kenya Kwanza really were looking up to Wetang'ula to make a decision that was in their favor, and they really had their day. So I was not expecting any surprise coming from Wetang'ula, much as we will call for our speakers, because again, the position he holds today is not the Speaker of Kenya Kwanza, it's not the Speaker of UDA or any party or even ODM, is the Speaker of the National Assembly of Kenya. So what we will want to appeal moving forward, Miriam, I think, because a lot of misconception and there are a lot of things really going around that perhaps this was more of a partial judgment coming from, Speaker Wetang'ula, that it was not anchored on any law or whatever kind of things. But again, Miriam, if we are to go back really and ask ourselves, in as much as the Azimio coalition really had numbers way ahead of Kenya Kwanza. That is after the August general election. Miriam, it's also in the public domain that there are parties within the Azimio coalition that decided to ditch the coalition, and they're in bed with Kenya Kwanza. They have announced it publicly. They have been to President William Ruto's official residence. They have even submitted some of the petitions or cases at the courts really to formally disassociate themselves from the Azimio coalition. They have even protested to the registrar of the political parties really to remove their names or their parties from the Azimio coalition. So it will only be illogical really for anyone to think that you can have a forced marriage with someone who does not want to stay with you. And in this case, I think these other parties or elected leaders have decided to go in bed with the government of the day. They feel like this is where the goodies are. I mean, everyone will want to identify with the winner's side. Azimio lost the presidential election. So anyone in the right mind, and especially not being a major party, because we have not seen most Wiper or even, of course, ODM or most Jubilee Party members really canvassing around Kenya Kwanza. But it's about these small splinter parties that have maybe one or two or three. But again, they have a very big impact, because in itself you can see how it has caused Azimio really a very lucrative positions, and the running of the affairs of the National Assembly is concerned. And it's normal, we are talking about having good behaviors, good manners. We're talking about political parties and political leaders to have at least some semblance of principles. We are still very far from achieving that, Miriam. And today, if Raila Odinga had won the election, I can quite tell you that you would have seen so many of the Kenya Kwanza splinter parties really, or people elected on Kenya Kwanza ticket, jump shipping to the other side. I think to them, being in government is it's warmer than being in the opposition. And that is why they will really want to identify with the government. And I can bet, Miriam, even some of the leaders who are still on the other side of Azimia, I'm not saying all of them, don't be surprised as time goes by, you will have some of them really jump ship to the government side. I mean, that has been the nature of our politics. There's nothing new. And so I'm not treated to any surprise that they are binding coalition agreements or such kind of things. By the end of the day, I mean, these coalitions are agreed upon by human beings, and when they decided to dishonor them or really to violate them and do it formally, there's nothing that you can do, absolutely, Miriam. So in this case, Kenya Kwanza has had it, and there's nothing that Azimio can do, and they should not even waste their time and energy in going to court. In any case, they must not have the majority seats or positions in the National Assembly for them to be able to do their work. I mean, they are going to get their salaries as normal. They are going to carry out with their legislation representation and oversight roles as normal. They don't need necessarily to be to be leaders of majority or whichever kind of argument they are trying to advance for them to carry out their job. So they have really to settle and know that this is a gone matter. There's nothing they can do. And I could read the mood from Speaker Wetang'ula yesterday when he said, as he concluded, that anyone who feels uncomfortable with the ruling he has given can seek legal redress. And itself, and an observer and an analyst for some time in this country, Miriam, and in such affairs, I can quite tell you that the case is as dead as it is, and before even arrival. So they should not even waste time. Okay. And I know what I'm saying.
Yes, and I think I agree with you. And all right, we'll not even talk further on it. But yes, I do agree with what you're saying. I just bumped into some news here, and Kenya has failed to strike oil and gas deposits in the coastal strip that has for years been at the center of the international border dispute with its neighboring Somalia. Seismic surveys at Milima 1 well, which is known as Block L12B in the Lamu Basin, revealed that the wells were dry, ending a 10-year search for oil in the coastline that had emerged as one of the world's hottest exploration projects. The Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, said the ENI Kenya business venture, formerly AGIP, folded the project before mid this year, and it failed to trace deposits of oils and gas in the area. It granted the exploration permit in 2012 amid protests from Somalia's government that Kenya was offering the blocks illegally. Kenya stepped up exploration activities in the Lamu Basin in December last year, weeks after rejecting a UN court ruling that decided mostly in favor of Somalia. I didn't even know we were doing this. Tawish, were you aware? We are actually exploring one of these wells that were under dispute. But well, now we found zero.
Well, Miriam, I was aware, but not with the very fine details about the same. But again, we all understand the dispute that has been there, of course, about that region. And I think it is some of maybe the factors that is not making it possible for this project really to proceed as it were, and or even to be done the way it was envisaged. So the kind of some of the challenges I think we are experiencing is because of the disputes that are there. And once these matters are settled, then I think maybe the government will be able, or the relevant organs will be able to move with speed and really exploit these resources for the benefit of the people. So I think largely that could be the factor. Maybe that is why we are not seeing so much really being done in that front.
Okay, thank you so much. So what stood out for you this week as we wind up the show?
Well, a lot, Miriam, stood out for me this week, particularly. And I think the renewed effort to try and bring to an end the conflict in Ethiopia. Because again, I'm seeing just the other day, our president here in Kenya, Dr. William Ruto, flew to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Of course, was it yesterday on a different business altogether, but I am sure on the sidelines there was also more onto calling upon the leadership in Ethiopia and also the TPLF leadership to see into it how they can be able to find an amicable solution to this problem. Of course, even this morning I was reading in news that the immediate former president of Kenya, that is Uhuru Kenyatta, and the I beg your pardon, and the former president of Nigeria, if I'm not wrong, Olusegun Obasanjo, and another vice president, I'm not very sure from where, have been tasked really to go and try to renew, or renew the talks and make sure that at least by the end of the day, these mediation talks are going to be fruitful, and these leaders can be able to have a mutual agreement by the end of the day, so that we can have, some tranquility in this part of the continent. Because again, we cannot sit pretty as as a continent, or as a neighboring nation, and watching really Ethiopia go down, to the dogs. Ethiopia is one of those countries really which are also very promising in the continent of Africa. And if we leave it to go down the dogs, then we'll have a case of what is happening today in Somalia or South Sudan. We want to see more countries become more stable in the continent of Africa, and not even those who are stable really becoming unstable, Miriam. I don't think that those are the kind of things we really want to witness as a people or as a continent, and that is why there's a lot of effort, energy, and resources being put forward to make sure that Ethiopia can finally find a long-lasting solution between, of course, the government and TPLF, and also how to restore the good neighborliness and the relationship that they have had with Eritrea. Because as it is today, that relationship is actually is threatened, and if nothing is done, then we are going to see these nations really end up into a full-blown war. That is not what we want to see in the continent of Africa. Thank you, Miriam.
All right, thank you so much. What stood out for me this week is Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni on Wednesday, who apologized to Kenya for tweets sent out by his son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. General Muhoozi had tweeted that it will take 2 weeks for him and his army to capture Nairobi. He went ahead to tell tweets to suggest where he should live in Nairobi. He also said he would have wished Kenya's former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, to seek a third term. I think there's more to that, and maybe we'll have that conversation some other time, okay? Because we know his father is very good friends with the current president, so why would he wish the former president to have stayed longer? But anyway, I will digress. Saying he would have won. Okay, so all right, so that is that. But that is what stood out for me on this week. That unfortunate tweets and sentiments that were expressed, and the fact that President Museveni had to apologize on behalf of his son. That was very interesting. But anyway, that is where we end our show this week, the week that was. We've looked at some of the stories that have been making headlines and still continue to, and hopefully we can meet here on Sunday for Africa Showdown, where we shall continue looking at the trending stories of importance across the continent of Africa. Thank you, Samuel Tawish, for your time this morning. Enjoy your day, and indeed enjoy your day too, and have a good weekend. We'll see each other here on Sunday, God willing. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Bye-bye for now.